Thank you.
Mr Speaker.
I call Chris Farfoy.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. It is a privilege to speak to this bill, and while I rise, I'd like to acknowledge the member who just sat down and acknowledge the work that he is obviously doing in his electorate, and I'd also obviously like to acknowledge my own colleague, Rino Tirakatini, who has spent some time in the earthquake-affected area. Mr Speaker, one of the important changes within this bill is the obligation for owners of buildings to get an assessment of the safety of the building after an event, whether that be an earthquake or other natural disaster. There has been a very good process that has been had amongst all parties, and in that spirit there is going to be an SOP, and I think it's important that we do note that, and it was noted by my colleague David Parker and has been mentioned by the Honourable Jerry Brownlee around, I'll just make sure I get this right, new clause 26A 6 and through to 8. There is the ability for an owner to appeal a request for an assessment of a property, and the point that David Parker has found within the proposed legislation as it stands now is that that won't act as a stay on the process of getting, it shouldn't act as a stay in the process of getting an assessment. So it's my understanding that, along with the help of Mr Parker and also with the government, that a SOP will come to this House to make sure that is made very plain and clear through that legislation, and that is a good process. And it is an important process, Mr Speaker, because I think it must have been an issue for many building owners and members of Parliament in the Wellington region on the day after the quake. I know a lot of people on the Monday were asked to stay away from their workplaces and their offices, and on the Tuesday, as my staff went back to work, I went and saw my landlord and asked him what the situation around the structural safety of the building was. I am lucky because he has acted in good faith. He has seen the importance of making sure that an assessment has been done. He's had a very quick one done initially, and he has committed to be making sure that another one will be done when time allows and when the availability of a structural engineer allows, to make sure a proper assessment of the building is done. What this piece of legislation does put an obligation, other than health and safety legislation that is required now, for an assessment of a building to be made to make sure that it is structurally safe. And in those hours on the Tuesday morning, when I wondered whether or not my staff would be safe in the building, I wondered what the obligations of a building owner are, and I'm glad that that has been clarified in this piece of legislation. As I made, obviously acknowledged Stuart Smith, the MP for Kaikoura, I'd like to obviously send my condolences to the families affected by deaths in there, obviously to the community of Kaikoura. And also, as a youngster, I spent a lot of time in South Bay of Kaikoura. I've got some very good family friends there at the time. Sarah Bradbury, now Sarah Thompson, who was in Kaikoura at the time, and I was very happy to see that her family, who live in South Bay now, Ian and Bev, were safe and well via Facebook, so I wish them our love as well. The other issue I wanted to raise, because I don't want to take up my full 10 minutes, Mr Speaker, is the issue of preparedness. And there was some confusion, especially I think in the Wellington region and especially in my area of Mana, around the tsunami warning system and some of the confusing messages that were sent to the public. We were first told when the notice came out on Radio New Zealand that the tsunami alert was for the eastern areas of New Zealand, and then we were told that it was it would also be wide and included Wellington. And that didn't specifically cover the areas of my electorate. I live in Titahi Bay, quite close to the beach, so I, like many people, were confused by some of the messages coming out on the radio because we weren't sure whether Wellington included us. So I think if we can learn some lessons from the 7.8 quake that we had recently, it's that kind of thing that I think needs to be sharper. The other issue, which has certainly been raised by constituents in the areas that are coastal in the electorate, is a tsunami warning system. and that is whether or not there are tsunami sirens in our area. And after speaking to the senior manager of the Remo office in Porirua yesterday, we were told that there is no siren. And that is a good thing to know as a definitive, but also because there isn't the back-end process or systems in place for there to be an effective tsunami warning system there. And my colleague Grant Robertson has mentioned it already. I think the big lesson that we need to learn from that is that we need to take a serious look at making sure that we are as prepared as we possibly can be, and have a parliament-wide discussion about warning systems such as a tsunami warning system, where people can get the message nice and early when there is a local earthquake event where minutes make the difference. I know the government has mentioned that there could be the ability to have a text message service which is specific to specific areas, and I would ask that that be expedited, because that's the kind of thing that I think people who are a little bit anxious in low-lying areas in communities, certainly that I represent, would like to see happen, or just a simple nationwide system where the local volunteer firefighters alarm can be sounded continuously and people know what that message is. I think the system around the country at the moment is patchy. I understand there is a siren in the likes of New Brighton as such in Christchurch, but there is no system in Porirua. So I think one of the learnings that we need to make sure is that a decent and thorough look at a tsunami warning system where people have good, clear messages about who is going to be affected and what the messages are about when the alarm sounds and where to go. Thank you.